Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan here in the room and online. Thank you for attending our events today, which is a very important event. It comes in the category of protecting the environment that we live in. We have 3 guest speakers came a long way from the United States to tell us about some problem happening there. And it seems that Japan is kind of involved in this problem. Our main speakers today from the right side, Ms. Rebekah Hinojosa. She's co-founder, South Texas Environmental Justice Network. And to her left is Ms. Ruth Breech. She's senior campaigner for Climate and Energy Rainforest Action Network. And to my very right is Mr. Juan Mancias, a tribal chair, Carrizo, Comecrudo, tribe of Texas. It's like a Spanish name or something. Sorry. And today there is some Gulf Coast residents demand Japan stop responding, supporting LNG facilities. And there is, this problem is going on for years, and we want to hear what their claims and what their issues regarding that. And the session will be for about half an hour. Presentations, about 10 minutes each speaker. That will be followed by Q&A after that. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest speakers. Thank you. Please start as you like.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Ruth Breech. I'm a senior campaigner for the Climate and Energy team at Rainforest Action Network. I'd also like to acknowledge another delegate that we have here with us, Ms. Dina Nunez. So she's with the South Texas Human Rights Center, and her translator and grandson, Axel Gomez, they'll be joining us all week here in Tokyo. So we've come a long way. We just arrived in Tokyo on Saturday, so this is one of our first conversations, so please forgive us if there's any jet lag or just kind of adjusting to this time zone. We've had a lovely visit so far. I want to give just a little bit of overview and background to kind of set the conversation that then Juan and Rebekah will discuss in more depth. When we're talking about liquefied natural gas, there's nothing natural about it. This is methane gas, so this is liquefied methane gas that comes majority of the time from fracking. Fracking is also happening in Texas and northern New Mexico. It is happening in Pennsylvania and the northeastern. So there's 2 main shale deposits. And then these pieces of them where we have pipelines, which are also an issue for communities. And then the main conversation that we'll be having today is around the export terminal. But that is, again, just one piece of the midstream part. We have then shipping, importation to countries like Japan and China throughout Europe. And then I would say that this graphic also limits the kind of gas power plants that are happening in importation countries, but then it also leaves out recommissioning. So what happens when this gas is quote unquote done. So we think of it more in kind of a life cycle type process. And why is this important? Why did we come all this way? Because LNG, liquefied methane gas, is the biggest fossil fuel build out right now of our generation. There are 25 projects proposed in the US Gulf Coast. You'll see that kind of very tip of Texas, that's near the port of Brownsville. That's where the area where Rebekah and Juan are coming from, but it stretches out throughout the entire coast. So throughout the Ring of Texas, throughout Louisiana, and over to Mississippi. Some of the main pieces here that why this has become such a huge issue, the U.S. became an exporter in 2016, and that's when these proposals really, really ramped up. Some of the things that we're looking at, so for North America right now, the LNG that we're exporting, our capacity is expected to double by 2028. This is hugely problematic if we're talking about pathways to decarbonization, reaching net zero ambitions, because this goes in the opposite direction of what we want to do to have a stable and healthy climate. So new LNG export terminals can take up to 5 years to build and require a multi-billion-dollar investment. Each terminal requires 10 to 20-year offtake contracts, so they're essentially locking us into decades more of fossil fuel dependence. It's not phasing down. This is actually ramping up. Carbon neutrality, LNG depends on false solutions. Becca will go into that a bit more. This means offsets and certified gas and unproven technologies like carbon capture and storage. Some of the other considerations that we're looking at here is that this new infrastructure creates energy sacrifice zones. So the entirety of that area throughout the Gulf Coast, these are mostly Black, brown, and indigenous communities and low income. These are communities that are already deeply impacted by the petrochemical industry and have a history of increased cancer rates, increased asthma, and increased issues, health impacts because of the industries they're already dealing with. We're also seeing some of these dynamics not only in the Gulf Coast, but also in the Gulf South, so throughout Southeast Asia, in vulnerable communities. Another issue that we're seeing as we're kind of building out global networks of resistance to liquefied methane gas is human rights atrocities, especially in areas like Mozambique with Total Industries. Yeah, and then I think our kind of main piece here is that new oil and gas has no place in a livable climate and has no place in a safe community. And I'm just a patience here. We just kind of moved around a couple slides, so I'll skip through the ones I just touched on. And part of what we're looking at is the main pillars of support for the fossil fuel industry. This is a report that Rainforest Action Network with 8 of our global partners have put together annually. This past year was our 15th year, and this is the leading analysis of private fossil fuel financing, this fossil fuel finance report card. We look at both lending and underwriting for 60 of the largest banks by asset. It's a global tool. We have almost 600 organizations around the globe read and endorse the report. We are also working with a number of regions to adapt to their communities and the projects that they're working on. We look at key expansion companies in 10 specific sectors, and then later on I'll show you the website. It's a great tool if you want to do some more in-depth research on your own. It's interactive. Of the 60 largest banks, they have financed $6.9 trillion to the fossil fuel industry since 2016. We use that 2016 date because that's when the Paris Climate Agreement was adopted. And then of that money, just in this last year, in 2023 alone, $347 billion went to companies actively expanding fossil fuels. We've talked about going in the wrong direction. Fossil fuel expansion right now is furthering the climate crisis. We know that. So any further money going to fossil fuel expansion is contributing to that problem. Now we start to look at who the players are. Who are the actual banks that are giving that money? And the top of this list, again, by asset, it's JP Morgan Chase. Okay. JP Morgan Chase has been problematic for many years, but they're also the biggest bank by asset. So if you look at Mizuho, who's number 2, JP Morgan Chase is twice the size by asset of this bank. So they're kind of outsized in the ranking. Number 4, MUFG, and then SMBC as it sits here. So this is kind of the international dirty dozen. Again, US banks dominate this list as well as Canadian. The report focuses on 10 sectors. There's only 2 that I really want to pull out today, and that's again on expansion and on methane export and import. So those are kind of the 2 critical conversations that we're having right now because they're so closely interlinked. So here's some of our kind of top stats. This is on fossil fuel expansion. Again, the top financiers consistent with that initial dirty dozen graph that I showed, JP Morgan Chase, Mizuho, and MUFG. So these are the top banks funding fossil fuel expansion in 2023. This is a huge rise for the Japanese banks, Mizuho and MUFG. Citi and Chase, again, some of the biggest banks in the globe. And then the Royal Bank of Canada also rose in 2023. And then if you cross-section that with liquefied methane gas, that's where we really see a trend emerge with Mizuho, MUFG, the Spanish bank Santander on there. And this is one of the few key sectors that we saw actually increase in 2022 to 23. We're seeing a general decrease, not by a lot, but by a little bit. I do want to acknowledge that each year. And this is an area where we're seeing quite the opposite. And again, it's the Japanese, United States, and Canadian banks that are the biggest financiers. And where's all that money going? The money is going to some of these big companies. Enbridge is a Canadian-based midstream company. We deal with them a lot on some of the pipeline issues. NextAid Corporation, we'll talk a little more about today. The Rio Grande LNG was an $18 billion deal. Venture Global is a key player in the U.S. midstream sector on export LNG terminals, and Sempra, and then Eni. The Fossil Fuel Finance Report Card also looks and grades the policies. So there's a policy tracker if you'd like to look at that online. I just want to note today that the Dutch bank ING made a big announcement about 2 weeks ago where they announced that they would not be financing export terminals and starting in 2026. So this is one of the first banks to make that move, and we expect to see similar in the future, similar policies in the future. Again, I highly recommend going to bankingonclimatechaos.org. You can play and kind of spend some time with the different tools on that website, and it has the policy tracker. It has different tools that you can get into to review that data, and then also hear some of the frontline stories and the impacts around the globe. Last couple points I want to make here is that Japanese banks are the critical players. They are the critical financiers in the U.S. Gulf Coast. We see a mix by project of the way that each bank plays into. No other bank globally is involved in every single project in the Gulf Coast except for the Japanese banks Mizuho and MUFG. So you have here on the left, there's an incredible tool with the Sierra Club. They have an LNG tracker where all this data is available to the public, and you can go put different kind of mixes in there. This was focused on the Gulf Coast as a region, and so looking at about a dozen different projects. And then if you focus it in on specifically Rio Grande LNG, that $18 billion deal that went through last year, these were the key financiers. MUFG was the critical player that literally made this deal happen. We saw other banks like Société Générale step out. They had a hard time finding financing, and it was MUFG ended up being their anchor that helped make that deal happen. MUFG is also the only bank that has paid forward to the final investment decision for phase 2, which we think is very much in jeopardy. So they're literally banking on the future of this greenfield site to happen. So I want to keep this all at play as to the very important role that the private financiers are having in Japan that is literally playing out in people's communities in the Gulf Coast. So I'm going to pass it over to Juan to discuss the impacts and the work that they're doing.
The map that you see up here is where the Rio Grande Delta is at. It's actually a delta area. It's not a valley. And we look at the misnomers already from the very beginning, from pre-invasion, because we were invaded back 500 years ago right down this road, down this river. And so we don't talk about pre-contact, we talk about pre-invasion. And it used to be very, very clean water, and we had people that lived there that were fishing off this area. They would use the sotol plant. They would bring it in to make fibrous netting to do fishing. So this whole area that you're seeing here on the map is kind of a sacred area to us. There's a place called Garcia Pasture that verifies that there's at least 32 villages, and you can look that under the Texas. The World Monument Fund, and they declared it a threatened historical site. And the reason is because it really hasn't been studied, but there's a whole dissertation from someone there that, from the college there, that has put out the fact that they were digging up bones when they were building the chip channel at the time. And these are my relatives. These are the people that I come from. The blood that runs through me is from them. And it concerns me because we need to be able to have a voice for those people that did not have a voice at the time. And it's like, really not being aware of the language and not being aware of what's happening. So that's one of the important things that when we talk about Garcia Pasture. And Garcia Pasture is very sacred to us. And those villages run all the way up the Rio Grande River. And to us, the Rio Grande River is where the first woman was created. And one of the biggest things that we have to talk about is because they kind of forego and kind of forget about the indigenous rights of the people there that are not federally recognized. And since we're not a federally recognized tribe, we stay and maintain our rights as human beings, as the indigenous people of that area. And even through a lot of the DNA testing that is coming up now, people are coming up and understanding that they're connected to this land and have the connection. They have lived there forever. We have deeds, we have all kinds of information that can lead us back to connecting way back into that pre-invasion time in 1516. Of course, we talk about the banks being involved in the Equator Principles of banking, and we need to understand that some of those are becoming quite antiquated, and basically because we are now have a voice and are speaking up for our rights, and a lot of people have been mistreated and some have been assassinated for bringing up these issues. And I think it's important that we understand that we're trying to make a statement here of connection, and that we're connected. The bridge that we hear about is not a bridge of that hasn't happened before, because now we're trying to bridge the past to the future. And again, we're looking at the costs that are involved in this thing, and how we are barely just able to do these things, come out and talk about these things, because we're put in a situation where we're kind of limited to be able to talk about these things and bring it out to the media and bring it out to the banks and to whoever needs to listen on how bad the indigenous the wrong of indigenous rights is happening in this area right now. And it starts from the Port Authority, and it's like a jigsaw puzzle, trying to put pieces together. Who are we going to talk to? Who's going to listen? And who are we going to try and make the changes with? So a lot of this is part of the tribal opposition to what is going on, and they keep trying to find ways to maintain their contracts and their permits. So they ask the agencies, the bureaucrats, to modify the program, modify the permits to allow that to happen. And when you start modifying permits, that means that none of these agencies have a policy of due diligence to be able to recognize the rights of the tribe that has always lived there and maintained a place of historical presence. Go and pass it to Rebekah now.
Hello, my name is Rebekah, or Becca Hinojosa. I'm with the South Texas Environmental Justice Network. To be clear, our communities do not want LNG. We've made it very loud and obvious and clear that we do not want LNG. These LNG companies are trying to force this polluting industry on our small, low income, brown, and indigenous community. So all of the communities that would be forced to live next to these LNG facilities have passed anti-LNG resolutions. The school district that represents these communities has voted against major tax subsidies for these LNG projects, and the water district has passed a resolution to refuse water to this LNG company. So this is literally being forced on us. And why are our communities vocal against LNG? Because LNG threatens our way of life, okay? It threatens our livelihood, which is dependent on shrimping and fishing. People need to be able to shrimp and fish in clean waterways because that is how they feed themselves. That is how they put food on the table, okay? LNG would also threaten our ecotourism economy. These tanker ships would literally push out the dolphin watch tour companies, the sports fishermen, and we do not want to choke on this LNG pollution. These LNG industries would be the biggest polluters in the region, and I'll get into that further down in the presentation. And we've made it clear that we do not want to be sacrificed for the fossil fuel industry build-out. 3/4 of the Texas Gulf Coast is already hulking with storage tanks, with refineries. Our last little piece in South Texas is the only landscape where we don't see a smokestack or a flare stack on the horizon when the sun sets. And we're trying to keep it that way. And we are working with other Gulf Coast residents across the region to stop the LNG build out because they don't want to be continuously sacrificed. They're already dealing with cancer clusters and other problems with the fossil fuel industry. So our communities have been vocal against these facilities. We've been doing everything we can to stop them for nearly a decade. We had a major lawsuit victory in August. This was one of many lawsuits that we filed. And the court ruled in our favor and actually canceled the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission authorization for these LNG projects, meaning that their permits are canceled. Right now, the FERC is re-reviewing these permits, and one of these companies, Rio Grande LNG, has found a loophole around this lawsuit victory, even though the court any day now will issue an order saying that they have to stop construction. They're using all that time they have to keep bulldozing. So right now, even though they don't have a permit, in my community, they are bulldozing wetlands and sacred sites. So I mentioned that we've been fighting back against these facilities for nearly 10 years. We've had some major victories other than the lawsuit. Juan Mancias and I have been part of several delegations. We went to France, and through international connection and international activism, we successfully pressured a French bank, Société Générale, to withdraw from Rio Grande LNG. We've also worked with organizers in Ireland. We successfully convinced the Port of Cork to cancel an MOU with Rio Grande LNG, so they are not going to import gas from that facility. We've also, I mentioned, convinced the school district to vote against these tax abatements, these tax subsidies for the LNG projects. Sorry, the writing is so tiny. Next slide. Okay. So Rio Grande LNG has several greenwashing scams and tactics in order to attract investors. We had convinced a major investor, Engie, to pull out of Rio Grande LNG. They also came under pressure from the French government. And then Rio Grande LNG slapped on this carbon capture proposal. And when they did that, the French company Engie came back and latched onto the project. So, you know, this carbon capture proposal is an unproven, untested technology for LNG, clearly a scam. And because of that, they pulled out and canceled the carbon capture proposal. They also plan to certify emissions. What that means is that they're claiming that they can source responsibly responsibly drilled gas, which is not true, is also a farce. So our communities have been vocal against these facilities, also largely to the hazardous pollution that would be released from the LNG projects. As I mentioned, LNG, if it comes to town, would be the biggest polluter in the area, releasing particulate matter, which is bad for respiratory health, releasing massive tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. These greenhouse gas emissions, if you look at the entire life cycle from extraction to export, Rio Grande LNG and Texas LNG would release the equivalent to 50 coal-powered plants or 40 million cars per year. So these are massive amounts of climate-killing emissions that don't need to come online. Other community risks include endangered species. Rio Grande LNG, Texas LNG plan to build literally across the street from a federal wildlife refuge in the middle of a major wildlife corridor, which is supposed to allow species to migrate from Mexico into Texas. These species that are at risk include the endangered ocelot, the Oplomado falcon, the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle, and numerous flora and fauna. Another risk that we really need more attention, we really need media and everyone to highlight this, is SpaceX. So we are also dealing with Elon Musk's SpaceX rocket launch facility. He is using our low-income brown and indigenous community as a testing site to attempt to launch the largest rocket in human history that would supposedly take people to Mars. Okay, this is already causing devastating situation in our region. This past November, Elon Musk blew up a rocket. It caused an earthquake. That was the first time I'd ever felt an earthquake in my entire life, and it was because of a billionaire. A billionaire caused an earthquake. That was felt over 32 kilometers away. It shook my apartment. I felt like vomiting from the vibrations it was at like 7 in the morning. And we have been raising the alarm of SpaceX just 6 kilometers away from the LNG sites. So LNG is already a huge explosion risk. We're dealing with the current explosion risk of SpaceX, exploding rockets next to giant tanks of gas, next to tanker ships of gas, just spells possible disaster. So we have made it clear to regulatory agencies that they need to investigate, that they need to do a safety risk analysis, and they haven't responded to those requests. I mentioned the rocket that exploded in November. Debris from the rocket ship fell on the LNG sites. We know it's an issue. So there are several LNG facilities threatening the Gulf Coast, including Rio Grande LNG, Texas LNG, Rio Bravo Pipeline, others along the Gulf Coast. All of these LNG companies claim that they claim to regulators, to their investors, to shareholders that they're going to try to build as quickly as possible, that they'll come online immediately. Rio Grande LNG was claiming that they would be fully operational in 2021. That's not true. It's 2024. They're still facing significant delays. They haven't built the facility, and that's because of community opposition. And we're going to keep challenging the project every step of the way. We have this lawsuit victory. We're challenging other permits that these facilities have. And Rio Grande LNG also claimed that they would reach final investment decision on phase 2 of the project this year, and they haven't done that yet. And that is because of ongoing community resistance. We will not go away.
Thank you. I would like to open the floor to Q&A. I would like to take the first question from the floor. Okay, yes, please, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. My name is Mara Bajan from the Japan Times. And I was just wondering if you could comment on the Biden-Harris administration's temporary pause on new LNG export, which was adopted in January of this year, if I'm not mistaken. So just my question is this pause, has it had an impact as far as you can see? And what is the prospective future? Like, what do you think will happen going forward, of course, in view of the elections in November? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll start to field that. And thank you for bringing that up. I figured that there would be interest here, and I meant to bring it up during the map section. So the pause on export permits is from the Biden and Harris administration and the Department of Energy. It did happen this year in January, and that was the result of advocacy from the frontline groups like Juan and Rebekah, and then groups also in Louisiana partnering with national organizations. So there was a letter that was sent from the organizations to the administration. They were responsive. There was a lot of different dynamics there. Recently, a new report came out by Cornell University that has been peer-reviewed multiple times and saying that LNG is worse than coal when you look at the entire life cycle emissions, and that was some of the contributing factors to the pause to stop and assess. What we've seen with the pause is that it has had a chilling effect on the industry. Some of the conversations that we've had with the U.S. banks and the Canadian banks in regular engagement is that no project went to final investment this year in 2024. No bank felt confident. I think they're all kind of waiting out the election to see who's going to come into office, because that could have dramatic impacts. The pause has been legally challenged, but it's still, I think, the chilling is there. And at this point, there's a lot of discussion around scenarios and what could happen from here, and there's a lot of lobbying and advocacy that's happening. We do anticipate for there to be new kind of rules or guidance in place from the Department of Energy. How stringent those will be is the question, if there is a furthering of a Harris administration. I think, unfortunately, what we see in the U.S. is that fossil fuel companies are very powerful, and they're involved essentially in both parties, Democrats and Republicans. So we're not expecting a ban per se, but as we're kind of looking at the crystal ball here and making, informed predictions, they're just that. Anything could happen. We would anticipate, if there was a Trump administration, that there would be no ban in place. There would be more development there. So I think everybody's eager, and there's just a lot of anxiousness around it, and there's some very real work, depending on which condition. But we've also had some really great folks remind us that their advocacy, there have been projects canceled during a Trump administration, so there has been experience. There's been a lot of legal cases, like what's happening in the Valley. So I think that there will be very continued fierce advocacy on these projects. It just may look a little different based on the administration that takes place. But I want to open that also to Becca and Juan to see their perspectives on that big question.
Yeah, so the projects that we're dealing with in South Texas were not affected by the pause. They already had their authorizations from the Department of Energy. So that was Texas LNG and Rio Grande LNG. So no, we couldn't leave it up to any administration to decide our fate. We keep fighting regardless. We fought through Trump, through Biden, through Obama, and whatever comes forward. And that's why it's important that we continue taking legal action, joining delegations here to Japan.
Thank you. I have a question online from David McNeil of the Irish Times. It's actually two questions. First one, are Japanese financial institutions any better or worse at funding fossil fuels than equivalent institutions in the US or EU? And second question, in your view, does climate change get the media coverage it deserves? Thank you.
So if you go back to some of the slides here, I don't want it to be dizzying, but I'm going to scroll back here, because what we're seeing is the Japanese banks are playing an outsized role. So the U.S. banks are not very good on fossil fuels, and actually some of the worst in the world. But what we saw is that they're bigger institutions, right? And so with the Japanese banks, with the role that they have right now in expansion and liquefied methane gas export, they are literally the leaders in enabling this build out. Bigger than the US institutions, bigger than the EU, and then also bigger than the Canadian institutions, which would be the top on the list. I don't want to say that we are also pressuring the US institutions. They're always on our list. There's always pressure there. There's been some incredible activism that was happening in New York all summer with the Summer of Heat and the Stop the Money pipeline. coalition. So they don't get a pass. And then we're also part of an incredible network. Juan and Rebekah went to France. There's literally an incredible network in France, Germany, Italy, throughout the EU that is doing pressure on the European institutions. So there's no country right now that is not having advocacy. Even in China, there's conversations happening around fossil fuels and financing fossil fuels from about private financiers. So this is an incredibly urgent issue, and the climate finance movement and climate justice movement is only growing. I think kind of seeding into this next conversation is absolutely not the amount of attention that climate issues are getting. It is hot here in Tokyo. It is way hotter than I thought it would be in October. I know you all had a heat wave. Rainforest Action Network has staff members in North Carolina. Those staff members live, one lives near Asheville, which is 2,000 feet up. It's a mountainous town. They do not have running water. The storms hit days ago. They didn't have text, cell phone service, nothing. There was not access to food or water. They still do not have basic needs met right now. So this is one of the deadliest storms that have happened. But even in this last, say, 6 months, there's been multiple hurricanes that have happened in the Gulf Coast. I'll let Juan and Rebekah talk about that. And there is coverage in the moment of the devastation, but there's not enough that's talking about what is contributing to this. We know that fossil fuels is contributing to climate change, if not the main contributor. And that's the conversation that needs to happen more. And that this isn't, in the US, we've had a whole issue around kind of Republicans dominating the conversation. Is climate change a hoax? We know that it's real. It has very real impacts that have been escalating over this last few years. And I think we need to stop having these silly conversations and really start to get to some of the analysis and ways to remediate the issue. Banks need to stop financing fossil fuels. They need to stop the financing expansion. That would be a good first step. No more new fossil fuels. They need to honor their net zero plans. They need to have transition plans. And then they need to start to phase down fossil fuels. This is what the science says. This is what everybody signed on. Any institution that signed a net zero commitment, that is what they agreed to. And now they need to have a real game plan to make that happen. These can't be empty promises anymore. They have to put action along with their commitments. And that's what we need to see aggressively over this next couple of years to really start to curb how big this issue has gotten. But I'll open it back up.
Juan?
Yeah, I think that 500 years ago, when our lands were invaded and also now occupied, there was a problem started, and it was the lack of understanding that there was a genocide that began through tribal erasure by getting rid of the people that were there. And that's what's been happening for the last 500 years. And also at the same time, you have to understand that everything that they came in there for 500 years ago was exported out. All the resources, the gold, the silver, anything they could export was exported to Europe. So that settlement mentality is still there, and I think that they don't understand that they're exporting resources still 500 years later from these areas, and it's not it's not applicable to us, and we can't use it. But they're destroying the places of power that belong to the people that are there. So that genocide continues. It's just a more subtle way of putting it, and they're being really, really keen about it by changing the narrative, And so we have to change the narrative back to what it really means. When they pass laws of no protest laws, like in Texas, they're saying that they're changing the narrative, that we have no rights to speak or rights to protest or rights to stop anything that's going on there. And they'll find ways and loopholes to get to us. And what we're trying to say is, look, this is genocide, what you're doing. You're continuing to do it. Texas is notorious for that. The very beginning of Texas was get rid of all the Indians. We don't want them here. And the thing was, they either moved them, killed them, or turned them into Mexican citizens because we lived on the border. And I think a lot of times that mentality is not applicable anymore because we're claiming who we are, and those are part of the UN indigenous rights. We have a right to be who we are. We have a right to be able to speak our own languages. And when that's not happening, then this is what you come up with, because they don't know the history, they make bad plans. So what I would say is these banks in Japan need to come and visit us. Come and see the real history, what has happened there. Come there where we're at. Let us tell our story, because you're not getting a story from LNGs that if you add a Y and an N between the L and the N are lying. You know? It's as simple as that, and I think we need to be able to say our story, be able to talk about it, not just from myself, from the other people, the other elders, the young children who said, what would happen if there was no Japan? There would be no LNGs, there would be no United States, nothing would have happened. We'd still be living with our own science, our own knowledge, because 500 years ago when they landed on these lands and invaded them, you know, our science was working. We had clean water, we had clean air, we had clean land. And there were plenty of people. We knew how to take care of our own problems. We were not out killing each other like they want to claim that we were doing. And I think that that's one of the things that we have to understand. There was a big movement because of climate change at one time, but that was natural. But now here we are, we ain't got nowhere to go, you know, and we have to be able to say, hey, how are we going to live with all this fossil fuel gentrification that has no answer? And it's all false solutions.
Thank you. If I may follow up on your remarks, you mentioned a few times, not only one, that you were invaded and you are under occupation. So do you think of, do you have any movement to have independent community or country or separate from the United States? That's what the impression you give, actually.
Well, the thing is that we're not trying to separate from anything that's there. We want to make sure that they understand that the state of Texas can divide into 5 states, and we will take care of the Rio Grande states. You know what I'm saying? And that should be the thing that it's in the Constitution. And I've always said that. And I think that it's able to say, yeah, let us have our own rights. Let us be able to have representation. We didn't write the Constitution. We didn't have any representation at the Constitution. And we deserve that representation because we're not the ignorant people they think we are. We became more like them because they started saying, hey, look, let's kill the Indian and save the man. Well, you know what? You didn't kill my spirit, but I know because I'm educated your way.
Any more questions? All right, let me ask Rebekah, please. You mentioned that you raised your case during the administrations of current President Biden and Trump and even Obama. So do you mean that the Republicans and the Democrats are the same in dealing with your concerns in terms of environmental protection? Or do you think the Democrats or the Republicans are better than the other side? Which is better or which is worse for the environment?
The issue here is that regulatory agencies are close to the fossil fuel industry and are repeatedly sacrificing our Gulf Coast communities. And this keeps happening through every administration. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has essentially become a rubber stamp, and they've never seen an LNG application that they didn't like. And I mean, this was part of our lawsuit victory. The FERC had done little to no environmental or climate justice analysis and just tried to speed through the process so that they could reapprove these projects. And now we see them making steps to do that again. So, you know, we'll continue to advocate and speak up throughout all these administrations. I was in Washington, D.C. Last month. I had to testify. I was in the basement of the Capitol because the Republicans were trying to prevent our press conference from happening, which was about subsidies that are continuously going to the oil and gas industry. So, you know, we're going to keep fighting, and we do see our community repeatedly sacrificed through every administration on fossil fuel issues and also on issues of human rights. We are a hub where asylum seekers are trying to seek support, fleeing violence, and also climate disasters in their own communities.
Let me just, because of, and I think that's where we have to change the narrative that they're throwing at us. Like, what is a critical infrastructure, and what is what you just said? I think we need to be able to look at this and say, okay, I'm questioning it because of your lack of history knowledge, of historical knowledge of what's happened here, and you continue to promote that idea.
Let me go back to David McNeil's second questions. I think it was not really explained well. He said, in your view, does climate change get the media coverage it deserves? So you have to give us kind of certificate. Are we doing our job as a media? Thank you.
Honestly, I don't think that there's enough said about climate change. And then there is a lot that is happening, especially in the Rio Grande Delta and along the coast, the Gulf Coast. We just saw another storm go through, and another one's building. And we got excessive tornadoes in places where they weren't before. I got to see one of the tornadoes in San Antonio, Texas, trying to go pick up a person at the airport. When these things happened, and we were in Uri, storm Uri, and we had no water for 10 days because everything was busted, and that was a lot. That's when we had like 4 days of under below zero, and it was bad on the people in Texas. It killed a lot of trees. It killed a lot of the plants from that area, and so I think that there's that's not up in front with a lot of the agencies that are there. They're not talking about it, and they're trying to sidestep it. I think that even Justice 40 to me was when they were offering money for climate change. I thought that was kind of Judas money. You were selling out because you're not really doing what needs to be done. So we didn't take any of that money.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we need more media coverage about who are the culprits that are fueling climate change. They have names and addresses. They have specific titles. The public needs to know who's responsible and who's not doing their job to address climate disasters. Texas had a famous winter storm that caused a dangerous blackout. In my apartment, I was without power for 3 days. I had to learn how to use a fireplace and cook my food that was going bad. My father, who's a frontline healthcare worker, also lives in Texas, was without power for nearly a week. At the same time, he then was trying to figure out how to get to work to help COVID-19 patients. He's a respiratory therapist and works on ventilators. When his power finally came back on, he didn't have water for almost 2 weeks and was still having to go to work to help people, okay? So we're dealing with layers and layers of problems in Texas, multiple different types of climate disasters every season. The community that Dina works with, they had a tornado that hit the area, which has never really happened before. Someone died because of that tornado. And I understand that Texas has become a hostile place for journalists. We've seen instances where journalists have been, pelted with rubber bullets by, aggressive police that have become essentially small militarization operations. So it's difficult to report, but we all have to keep working together, community organizers and reporters, to keep telling the story of what's happening on the ground and shining a light on who's responsible and what needs to be done.
Yes, I'd like to add to this. And I think where I was touching on this earlier is to make this really clear, is that everybody has been touched by a climate or extreme weather event. There is no safe haven. There's no place that will not be impacted, and it's only going to get worse. What I would invite the media, and this is literally the institution of the media. It is the reporters, it is the editors, it is everybody from the top up, the owners of these institutions, that we are behind the trends. We're seeing issues throughout the Gulf Coast. Where I live in Colorado, we now have a fire season. Where RAN is headquartered in San Francisco, there is a fire season. It's about 6 months long. And what we're seeing is after a hurricane and after a fire is then the insurance companies then either don't pay out residents, or they then deem an area that's been affected by a fire or a flood or severe winds. They say this is high risk climate, and then they raise the prices for that insurance. And I did forget to mention, and I want to name it here too, that Sampo is one of the insurance both providers and underwriters for Rio Grande LNG. We have companies like Chubb and Liberty Mutual that are also very active in this role. So we have this hypocrisy that is playing out right now with some of these key financial players, where they are continuing to underwrite and provide loans for the fossil fuel industry, and then they're shorting or increasing the costs for regular everyday people and small businesses. It's absolutely disgusting. And this is just starting to get some play on it. So I think what we're asking is again, having that like courage and time and effort to follow these very big stories, because they're only gonna get bigger. And we're seeing it every single day into connecting more of these dots. Again, there's an incredible network around the globe that is working on these issues literally full time. I think Yuki and I, when we looked at our schedules between a US time zone and a Japan time zone, it was literally like, it was just a 24-hour clock, because we were sharing some of that work all the time. So the stories are there. They're absolutely there. The data is here, and it absolutely needs more light shed on it so that we can really have that be the catalyst towards solutions. So this is absolutely an invitation, and then to be asking the provocative and hard questions, in particular about how solutions, and that it's not just the individuals as, you know, an individual, but how we're actually going to make this systemic change to address this huge problem that is global.
Thank you. Anybody has more questions? Okay, let me move to the nuclear energy. What do you think about the nuclear energy? There's a lot of opposition almost all over the world against civilian nuclear energy. Is it part of your activities as a solution?
Well, right now, just up the road from where I live in Wilson County, they're working on some uranium, pulling it out of the ground, especially around the Eagle Ford Shell area. And I think that we're trying to stop it, because, I mean, again, they're just going to places to try and mine things with the same contaminated water that they're using for fracking. And that causes a problem. So, I mean, you know, it's just the saturation of the water into the system will be hitting our aquifers.
All right, thanks. All right, could you please tell me about, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I did want to talk about nuclear a little bit. Actually, what I want to talk about is solutions. I personally, and the RAND doesn't have an organizational stance on this, but this has come up in the bank conversations too, because it's kind of, well, how do we start to get there? How do we move our systems here? I think what banks can do and what the fossil fuel industry can do is there needs to be a hard line right now. No more fossil fuel expansion. None. We use what we have, and there's no more new projects. There's no more new infrastructure. There's more new mines. There's no more new gas fields, no more new oil drilling offshore. None. We stop. That's the line that we make, and then we begin to phase down. We phase down what we already have, and we give the time for renewables that are rooted in just transition. We're not trying to replicate the same system that we have right now, where people's human rights are being trounced on, where Indigenous people don't have voices at the table, where communities are sick, We're not trying to replace one system with another. We're trying to build something new, and it's going to take time to do it at scale. So that's what we need to see is this rise of. And I think I would toss this back, especially here in Japan, that nuclear is very controversial. I grew up in the Ohio River Valley, which is in the kind of the Midwest area of the United States, and a bordering community is in Pennsylvania, where 3 Mile Island happened. And so there's very real consequences to whatever energy that we pick. And what we're not seeing right now is the responsibility and care, whether it's the fossil fuel industry or whatever next energy piece is being put out, that it needs to be done in a completely different manner, and that we need to collectively build up those options. And I think we have some very real options with renewables that could be scaled if there was that level of effort, money, and resources, and time and engineering put into it.
Thank you so much. If I wrap up by a question about your coming up activities in Tokyo, do you plan to meet some officials? Do you have any plans for demonstrations or stand-ups in front of some banks? Are you going to have any other activities in Tokyo?
We are definitely here to make our presence known, especially to the banks and the insurance company that is driving these projects, forcing these projects on our community. So yeah, we'll definitely be holding banners and speaking out.
We want to make sure that they recognize the fact that their part in the genocide that is happening on the West Coast. In the Gulf Coast, I'm sorry, and also on the West Coast. But we have several problems, like there's a saguaro pipeline that's going to go under the river back around a little town called Sierra Blanca, back by Hot Springs, another sacred site of ours, into Mexico, and then go out to an LNG that they're preparing out in the Sea of Cortez. So they're trying to make it shorter way to get the LNG to this side, and that's not proper. That's not right. And so we want to talk about those. We want to talk about Donnell Point in Corpus Christi, which is also under the Enbridge influence. And Enbridge, of course, we know where they stand. They're bringing the Rio Bravo pipeline into our LNGs that we're not 9. I wish they were mine, but they're not. But the LNGs that are coming into Brownsville. The thing is that there has to be a point where we're not just going to make a front line. We are the front line, and that's what's happening right now. Is that this tribe has become the front line. We bought land along in Brownsville, in Cameron County, to be able to strategically find a way to keep them from coming through. And now they want to buy 3 of our properties. And they said that I did it intentionally. I said, no, I did it strategically, because I just don't believe that you need to be digging up the lands anymore and digging up my ancestors. And I want to make sure my ancestors can rest in peace. Everybody else's ancestors rest in peace. Sam Houston's got his own grave. Nobody would go and spit on it or even go out and dig it up. But hey, my people getting dug up, they were special to me. They were good people. They were human beings. So who I am lies in the blood, the sweat, and the tears of my people. And that's important. And that's into the ground right there. And when you're digging it up, you're also bringing that out. And I think that we have to be aware of those things.
Thank you. Just clarification, you mentioned the word genocide also a few times. Is it genocide against the environment or the people, or both?
One of them is ecocide, and then the genocide is when you don't want to pay attention to the people of the land. And when you continue to erase them, say you don't exist, you don't have a right to speak, or these, you don't exist anymore. That's genocide. And an ecocide is the same thing, but that's taken away because it doesn't have any meaning to you. You're not connected historically, you're not connected humanly to that land.
Thank you very much. I could give last question if you have. Otherwise, we wrap up the event. All right. I think you explained everything very well, and we wish you have a good activities in Tokyo. And if you have a schedule, please give it to the media so they can send reporters and camera people to the events and film you. You have some comment?
Yeah, can we take a photo with you?
Oh, it's online, so. But thanks for the offer. It's my honor. Okay, thank you very much again for coming, for attending online. And I hope you can write about it because they mentioned the media. We feel we are involved here. And I'm glad that our FCCJ, Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan, is the first to host you, and we always support such a movement. Thank you very much. And that's it for today.
I just want to let you know that they're also fracking in Wyoming.
So. All right, thanks. All right, thank you very much, and have a nice evening. Thanks. Please give a big hand of applause.
Thank you.